Get ready for Primary Palooza. 2014 Super Tuesday is just over a month from today. On May 20th, half a dozen states from coast to coast will give us important clues about the midterm landscape as we head into a summer of campaigning. Voters in Arkansas, Georgia, Idaho, Kentucky, Oregon, and Pennsylvania will all head to the polls. First up, a primary hat trick will test the strength of the Tea Party. In Kentucky, Republican leader Mitch McConnell is fighting a two-front war for political survival. He's being beaten the living daylights out of Tea Party challenger Matt Bevin, spending $12 million on the race so far. But if you're wondering who McConnell is worried about, look no further than his messaging on health care. Though Bevin is running radio ads with the tagline, "Mitch loves to vote for funding Obamacare," McConnell has softened his tone on the law, telling health care workers this week in Kentucky, "We're going to figure out a way to get this fixed." McConnell may win on May 20th, but he's not exactly popular with the grassroots. When a voter asked Senator Rand Paul this week why he's backing the Senate leader, Paul refused to answer the question publicly, saying he would explain his endorsement in private. Moving on to Georgia, where there's a seven-way primary fight that pits establishment Republicans against the Tea Party with no clear frontrunner to take on Democrat Michelle Nunn. If no candidate gets 50% of the vote, the top two will compete in a July 22nd runoff election, further delaying the GOP's general election campaign. A lot of time to get mud on the tires. A runoff seems inevitable at this point. This week, the Chamber of Commerce backed business-friendly Congressman Jack Kingston, which is a good boost for his candidacy. But despite all that, the ugliest primary fight may be in Idaho's 2nd District, where Boehner ally Congressman Mike Simpson is fighting off a challenge from Tea Party candidate Brian Smith. The race has become a proxy fight between the GOP's business wing, represented by Boehner, Mitt Romney, Congressman Paul Ryan in the Chamber of Commerce, and Tea Party groups like the Club for Growth and Senate Conservatives Funds. And both sides are flooding the airwaves with ads. Romney himself visited last month to campaign for Simpson and endorsed him in his first ad of the cycle.
You can take it from me, the conservative choice for Congress is Mike Simpson. I know because I've seen him in action.
In Arkansas, the primary signals the official start of what will be one of the most bitterly fought battles this year, the Senate race between incumbent Democrat Mark Pryor and Republican challenger Congressman Tom Cotton. Pryor is considered one of the Senate's most endangered members, but narrowly leads Cotton in 3 recent polls, including one conducted by the DSCC. Moving on to Pennsylvania, where a 4-way Democratic primary will decide which candidate will take on one of the most vulnerable Republican governors in the country, Tom Corbett. Self-funder Tom Wolf has blanketed the airwaves with ads, and so far, it's working. He leads Congresswoman Allison Shorts and the other Democrats in a recent Franklin and Marshall poll, but nearly half of Pennsylvania voters remain undecided. Finally, in Oregon, 4 Republicans are fighting it out to take on that state's Democratic Governor, John Kitzhaber. Joining me now, Nathan Gonzales, deputy editor of the Rothenberg Political Report and contributing writer for Roll Call, Shira Center. She's also a fellow of the Harvard Institute of Politics. I knew her as Toplitz, but you're now Senator. Congratulations, Shira. Great to have you on.
Thank you. Thank you.
Nathan, I want to start off with you regarding, I think the big one here on May 20th is, without doubt, Kentucky. Right. And it's Mitch McConnell against Matt Bevin. We think McConnell's going to be okay here. He's certainly spending like he wants to win this in a resounding manner. But it has sort of opened him up to a lot of attacks from the right. You see Rand Paul not publicly endorsing him.
Right. I think that unless the dynamic of the race completely changes, Mitch McConnell will win the primary. And I usually avoid talking about margins, how much do they win by, but I think it could be applicable in this place to see, does he win 70-30? Does he win 55-45? Now, the answer is he might win somewhere in between, but then the task is, and what we'll look at in the polls, is how quickly can McConnell consolidate the Republican base? And, over the couple of months afterward, does that general election ballot shift? Does he start to gain an advantage over Grimes because the Republican base is finally coming home when they were upset with him in the primary?
Shira, how significant is this race against Matt Bevin? Are we putting too much of an emphasis on it here in D.C.? Is it just sort of one of these things that Mitch McConnell will get past in May and we'll all forget about this when the real attack machine against Grimes shows up come fall?
I do think it's really tempting to cover this race because, after all, he is the minority leader. Kentucky has elected some Democrats statewide in the past, right? So there are some kernels of some signs that it could be a competitive race. But really, we've always thought of it as roll call as a long shot for McConnell to lose, both in the primary and also to a degree, lesser degree, in the general election. We think he's going to be fine next month. We'll say at the start of the cycle, when we weren't sure just how much money Matt Bevin was going to put in to fund his own campaign, we wondered a little bit. But really, for the most of the cycle, we're pretty sure he's going to be safe.
And it's interesting about Mitch McConnell. It's one of these things where no matter how much people hate him, that message of seniority, I could be majority leader, it always resonates. So Mitch McConnell, I like the way you guys put that, Shira. A tough one for him to lose. Let's turn now to Idaho. I find this divide between Mike Simpson and Brian Smith to be fascinating, Nathan. You basically have what we talk about here in Washington, the establishment versus the Tea Party, playing out with some big names. Mitt Romney's first out of the cycle for Mike Simpson. There is a real interest in this race within the Republican Party.
Right. There's more money and attention being spent on this House race than a lot of Senate races around the country right now. And right now, Congressman Simpson started with good polling numbers on the surface level, the top line, because he was just so much better well known than Brian Smith. But beneath the surface, there was some vulnerability because of these votes, voting for raising the debt ceiling and things that Republicans used to vote for all the time. Yeah. Now it's being played out. The spending has been fairly even between the pro-Simpson and the anti-Simpson groups, and he's holding up so far. And I still think there's going to have to be a game changer in order for Congressman Simpson to lose.
It's quite amazing to see that in Republican primary politics, the bailout is still very much a focus of these ads. But let's read into this a little bit. If Mike Simpson were to go down, what message would that send regarding the 2014 midterms?
Well, I think it would empower a lot of the Tea Party groups or conservative. It would empower them ahead of a few of the big contests this summer, right? It would empower them ahead of, for example, Mississippi, Thad Cochran's re-election battle there against a Tea Party candidate, maybe a couple other things, maybe Kansas down the line as well, right? But because so much, as you mentioned earlier, is focused on this one date in May, it's going to be difficult for the Tea Party to gain a whole lot of momentum out of that. That said, this is very much a Club for Growth versus Chamber of Commerce battle when you're talking about outside groups. And this would be a big mantle for the Club for Growth and a huge win for them in the cycle overall.
I think one thing about House races and House primaries, going back to last cycle, it wasn't the House races that got the most attention where incumbents lost. It was some of the ones that didn't have these big groups, like a Gene Schmidt in Ohio, John Sullivan in Oklahoma, Cliff Stearns in Florida. And so even if Simpson wins, that doesn't mean that other incumbents are safe in their primaries.
It's not a good year to be an incumbent. We can all agree on that. Lastly, I want to come to Georgia, which I find the most fascinating because you have a lot of strong contenders in this race, and you also are seeing this establishment versus Tea Party narrative play out, and it could go to a runoff. And Shira, you were up on Capitol Hill a lot before you became a woman of Harvard, and one person we all enjoyed covering was Paul Brown because he doesn't hold a lot back. But there's a real danger that if someone like Paul Brown were able to get through to that final runoff, you could presumably push the candidate from the Republican side very far to the right ahead of an opponent like Michelle Nunn, who's pretty much a pragmatic moderate Democrat.
Absolutely. Make no mistake, Republicans on Capitol Hill who want to keep this Senate seat know it's in play if Paul Brown wins the nomination, and they're very scared of him winning the nomination. That said, it's a really crowded, totally unpredictable primary. The most recent poll out of there showed no one getting more than 20%, which means it's almost for sure going to go to a runoff. And I will also mention, we sent a reporter, Kyle Trigstad, down to Georgia this week to cover this very race, and he interviewed Paul Brown on Tuesday night. And Paul Brown is definitely the more subdued and lower key Paul Brown than what we know him from those interviews on Capitol Hill. Definitely is very much aware of the stakes, yes.
Nathan, just following up, Georgia.
And if Paul Brown has he's at a financial disadvantage. He's not a great fundraiser, and he needs some outside groups to come in on his behalf. The challenge is that because it's a crowded race, if you come in and attack another candidate, you may not know who you're boosting. So I think the race is very fluid.
And right now, it's
runoff
Purdue will be a political junkie's dream.
It's going to be we're still all the way to July for this one.
Nathan Gonzales, Shira Center, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Pay attention, May 20th. It's going to be a heck of a day. That's it for this edition of the Daily Rundown.